Welcome everyone to our July webinar called Increasing Resilience Through Diversity and Integration. My name is Linda Nelson. I'm the president of ICOR, and I am an expert that I serve on the US tag and as the ICOR liaison for all sorts of different standards, but specifically looking at organizational resilience principles and attributes. And we're developing another standard on organizational resilience for policy and strategy, and I am also the author of the ICOR's Certified Organizational Resilience series of courses. This is our final webinar in this series of 7. So this is webinar number 7, where we're talking about enabling behaviors. And in January, we talked about individual resilience and really looking at the science behind personal resilience, you might call it, or individual resilience. In February, we looked at the behaviors of agile and adaptive. In March, we looked at resourceful, creative, and innovative, and looking at that from the perspective of inside the box. In April, we talked about collaboration and inclusion, and there's some bit of overlap between today's webinar and the April webinar, really due to the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion are often talked about as one piece. And we talked about collaboration and inclusion as the pair of behaviors. And today we're going to be talking about diversity and integration as the pair of behaviors. In May, we talked about being prepared, and in June, how being aware and reflective increases performance. If you are a member of ICOR, these are available in our members only site. You can also view them in our YouTube channel. And today, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about being diverse and integrated. And it really is the how. So one of the things that we've talked about is these are the capabilities of more resilient organizations. This is what they do. This is what they're able to do. That they need to put strategies together to enable them to do those things. But in reality, it's how the organization and its people operate that is what gets it done. So I would consider the behaviors the how, and the strategies really the what that you're trying to do. And you have to have these different behaviors in place in order for those to be successfully implemented. So today we're going to learn how to recognize the importance of building a more diverse organization. And my guess is that because this is such a big topic and it is something that is so well known, not just in the US, but I really think globally as well, that some of what we're going to be talking about today should be familiar to you. But what we're really going to be focusing on is that relationship between a diverse workplace and resilience. And then we're going to look at making sure that, as well as being diverse, that we're not being siloed. And so how do you make sure that you're integrated while you're being diverse? The webinar recording should be back on our webinar page in a day or two. Probably will be Friday this week. I will tell you up front that this is one of the longer webinars, so I don't foresee being done early to do questions, and I apologize for that. But please put any questions that you might have in the questions pane, and I will take a look at those after the webinar. And in order to get your certificate of attendance, you have to attend at least 35 minutes. You've seen us reference the Organizational Resilience Capability Assessment, and these are really the different capabilities tied to dimensions. We have the 5 dimensions and the 17 capabilities that we measure as part of that capability assessment, and you're going to see reference to these all through the webinar today. In addition, we have our organizational resilience model where we specifically look at strategies. And this is going to be very much tied together today with what we're talking about. So let's go ahead and look a little bit more closely at the organizational resilience model. What we've done is we've taken the behaviors of diversity and integration, and we've pulled the behaviors that are tied to each one of these strategies and shared them with you here. So under the leadership and strategy discipline, we've got leaders. It's effective empowered leadership. And in this case, the organization demonstrates and enhances effective leadership throughout the organization. And this is where we're talking about being integrated. Everybody gets access, and encourages a culture supportive of resilience. The leaders themselves in the organization, utilize a diverse set of skills, knowledge, and behaviors to achieve organizational objectives. And something you can do as you go through this next few slides, if you want, is kind of keep a tally on, does this describe my organization a lot, a little, not at all? And then you want to have leaders that encourage and incorporate a broad set of ideas and input. And goes to having that diverse set of ideas and input. That broad set is what it's referring to. And this fosters trust, collaboration, as well as healthy conflict, which helps to build those bonds between people, as well as treat people fairly when you're allocating resources and making decisions. When we look at culture and behaviors, we're looking at a culture supportive of organizational resilience. And in this case, really the organization is intentionally seeking out cognitive diversity as well as other forms of diversity with its people. So it's part of the hiring process to increase the organization's problem-solving capabilities and the management of change. And just to remind most of you, in I-Corps perspective and in the ISO world, change is actually being seen as a risk. So not change itself, but the not managing change becomes a risk to your organization. And so if you can do things that will improve how well you manage change, that's what we're trying to do. The other thing is we're going to be talking about intentionally building teams or business units or groups that are diverse. And in order to do that, you need to actually look at your people. And so one of the ways that you can do that is to identify your people as more or less adaptive or more or less innovative, and then as well as many other characteristics. But then consider these when you're creating teams, because this is going to increase their ability to develop ideas and solve problems as well. And then making sure that you're a part of the culture piece, that that your employees value and embrace diversity. I just got a comment from someone saying that they don't see the slides. Mine shows that it's showing, so I'm not sure. I don't think anyone else is having that problem, or I think I would have more people making a comment. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. Also, when we're looking at culture and behaviors, we're looking at this concept of shared information and knowledge. And the organization needs to make sure that there's a cross-sectoral integration and adaptability development program. And this just really means that you're purposefully looking to make sure that you're integrating your knowledge and information, and that you help people to become more adaptive in the organization itself. The organization also should encourage its people to talk to each other about what they've learned so they are better able to understand different perspectives. This is under that knowledge sharing piece. And then when we move to preparedness and managing risk, one of the things that when we're looking at the availability of resources, the organization needs to select and develop employees with a diverse set of skills, knowledge, and behaviors that can contribute to the organization's ability to respond and adapt to change. So here's where, this is under preparedness and managing risk, and we're very specifically looking at, managing change as part of that. So when we look at managing risk, one of the ways that you manage risk is to coordinate and align your systems. Everybody who's got a responsibility for managing risk should be part of, one unit, as you might call it, and that those are coordinated and aligned. So you should have systems in place that support the effective implementation of organizational resilience activities. And really specifically, this is looking at you have a risk management system, a business continuity management system, your information and cybersecurity system, whatever systems you have in place, they should be integrated and coordinated and aligned with each other. In order to do that, you have to have coordination across the systems so that they can collectively contribute to the organization's purpose and the protection of its values. So both individually and collectively. And lastly, the organizational resilience process itself is structured around a mixture of centralized and decentralized networked interested parties coordinated through that central program. So again, we're looking at kind of that integration and coordination and keeping people working together. So let's go ahead and get started and consider what it is that we're talking about. And I'm making an assumption that most of you have a pretty clear idea of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about diversity. But I just wanted to pull out a couple of definitions just from the dictionary itself. And this is a definition of diversity, not workplace diversity. But it's a state of being diverse or having variety. So variety is a synonym. And then you're looking at that practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds, genders, age, sexual orientation, etc. That's from the Oxford Dictionary. The other thing is that we should consider that we all have different experiences. We're going to be talking a lot today about experiential diversity. We all have different talents and skills. We also have different opinions and personalities. So when we look a little bit closer at workplace diversity, we're really talking about the distribution of differences among the members of a unit. And when we're saying unit, it's just a group or a team, whatever the entity is, with respect to anything about a common attribute. It's also characterized by the heterogeneity of members within the work units themselves. And those work units might be departments, groups, or teams. The key thing is it has to be at least 3 people. They can be situated at different or the same levels. I'm going to apologize. I do still have a lingering cough from having COVID a month ago. Um, and sometimes I don't get my mute button on fast enough. But there are many different dimensions of diversity. And so the construct of diversity itself serves as an umbrella term, for things like gender, nationality, your ethnic origin, your religion or worldview, whether you have different abilities or disabilities, your age, sexual orientation, and identity. And you can kind of divide those into observable things like race or ethnic background may be observable. Some of us wish our age wasn't as observable, and gender potentially. And then there's more non-observable demographics like your cognitive or your knowledge and expertise, what skills you have, and what values you might have. So when we're looking at different workplace diversity outcomes, we want to make sure that the organization recognizes the importance of the diverse nature and characteristics of its people. So number one, it has to identify, how diverse are we currently to get some sort of a benchmark. So they need to know their people. The other thing that the organization needs to do is consider a range of capabilities, information sources, and technical elements as part of that. Because we know that diversity is best implemented when there exists that opportunity to bring together those disparate thoughts and strategies into those cohesive solutions and actions. Diversity also gives you a broader knowledge base and a range of perspectives that in turn positively influence problem solving and decision making. And this is probably where we're going to focus the most on as we look at diversity through the lens of resilience. But understanding that you have to value diversity and it needs to be well managed in order to respond to current trends or manage change and achieve that competitive advantage. So I wanted to share with you there's so many examples that we could give, but I just picked this one because it was a crisis that impacted the whole world. And so the International Monetary Fund, they created a report in 2011 that was trying to answer the question of why the organization itself failed to anticipate the 2007 crisis. And the main reason given was groupthink. Okay. And the fact that, and also that they hadn't really captured the information that they should have captured. And so the other one that was kind of a big deal was a general mindset that they were big financial crises and advanced economies were unlikely to fail. Well, we have all learned that that isn't true. And then they hadn't done a very good job with their analytics. And so when they analyzed some of those factors leading to that failure, they really found the main cause was the team itself. it was composed mostly of men. No criticism to men, but you should have some women in the group. Um, and they had the same and very similar sociodemographic backgrounds, and they also had very similar life experience, and therefore they were not very diverse, and that's really what contributed to that groupthink. So it's really important in my mind that diversity is really relevant to try to reduce that groupthink, if for nothing else. One of the primary reasons we're talking about this today is because workplace diversity does impact performance. And we know that over a decade of empirical research, this has been going on for quite a long time. There's lots of different places that you can go for research on this, but that more diverse companies outperform less diverse ones. And so, and now, in more recent years, this idea of social justice, which we should all be abiding with, um, just being fair and equitable, that more companies are feeling compelled to focus on recruiting and promoting a workforce that's comprised of individuals from different backgrounds and experiences and identities. And this really wasn't the case years ago. So companies really should aspire to having a more diverse workforce. So it's kind of a dated Harvard Business Review article, but one of the things that I really found interesting about this was that if you ask employees, they really would like to be more homogeneous. And the reason for that is because it's easier. We all kind of hang out with people that are like us. And so it just seems easier to deal with people who have similar ideas than us. I mean, they may actually like the idea of a diverse workforce actually than having a more diverse workforce. Because when you have people that are similar to you, it's easy. You understand each other, you can collaborate smoothly, you really feel like you're making progress on it. And if you have other people coming in from quote, the outside, it can cause friction and conflict and sometimes feel counterproductive. We're not getting this done as quickly as we did before because we have to deal with somebody, um, somebody's, maybe more than one person, who's not going along with the rest of us. And one of the things they found is when you have a real homogeneous office or space or workplace, you might have higher levels of social capital, meaning that people are happy, they feel like everything's great. But when they look at performance, while they might be more comfortable and happier and they might feel cooperative, when they look at performance, and these are actual studies that have been done to measure performance, and they have found that they just don't perform as well. And so this is why on the left, you've got your three people that it's a much more diverse team than the three cats that are all thinking about the same gear, where the woman, and I don't know what that animal is, and the blue cat, I'm assuming, creates a more diverse team, and they're thinking about things in a different way, which then actually helps them to win. So I know it's just kind of a cutesy picture, but the idea being is that just because it's comfortable doesn't mean it's the best. So I wanted to figure out, you know, there's just so much work that's been published on workplace diversity, but there hadn't really been, and there's lots published about organizational resilience as well. But one of the things that we hadn't really seen was that direct relationship between not business continuity, between workplace diversity and resilience itself. And so, and the other, so I picked this piece of research rather than looking at white papers and things. And this is our predominant reference for this webinar. It is an open source document so that you can download it, and the actual hyperlink is also included in the references, which you'll get when you get your certificate. But the purpose of this was to look at the role of diversity in organizational resilience, and then they've put together kind of a theoretical framework for that we'll share. And what they've really done a great job is building on previous diversity research. So there's pages and pages of research that they have used to build their own study. And so that was the other reason why I picked this particular one. And so, and really particularly, while there are studies that have been done on workplace diversity and performance, not necessarily looking at specifically resilience of the organization um, in addition to performance. And so we're going to be looking at those those two elements as we talk today. So the main question they asked is, what role does workplace diversity play in the development of organizational resilience? And organizations we know are operating in an increasingly complex and turbulent world, even though COVID, I mean, we know COVID isn't gone, but we're not in the same crisis that we were 2 years ago, but we're still dealing with um, uncertainty, challenges, and all sorts of other things in addition to COVID. And so we really need to develop your resilience capabilities, which is what, part of, like I said, we developed in our organizational resilience capability assessment, and looking at how we can manage unexpected disruptions, maintain your high performance, and even thrive and grow. I will say that this research is very much based on managing risk. There is some of the work that refers to, better performance through, the selling and delivering of your products and services. And this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, that we have to look at resilience not just through the risk lens, but also through the lens of leadership and culture and behaviors and all of those things. So I am qualifying that even though I picked this as the reference, it is a little bit narrow. But if we think about managing risk as um, that managing change is one way you manage risk, then I think it fits much more nicely. So we'll go with that. So one of the things that we know is that diversity impacts your resilience capabilities. And so we know that diversity in organizational work units serves as that source of that heterogeneous perspectives, getting you different cognitive mindsets, looking at different creativity. It also gives you a larger pool of resources that can be helpful in dealing with unexpected problems. And like I said, this isn't all about risk. We have problems every day at work, and so having more people looking at that problem, you're more likely to solve it. And this is really consistent with the idea that you have to have variety and its important role in reducing errors as well. And so when you need to make sure that there's variety in your organizational units, and that they're able to deal with the varieties of the unit itself. Because if you lack variety, they're going to miss important information. So just like that little sample that I gave from the International Monetary Fund, they missed important information. Their diagnosis was not complete, and they weren't even able to come up with a remedy because they weren't in a place to even see that there was a problem until it was too late. And so having these diverse work units really helps to contribute to resilience by offering that broader knowledge base. So what this paper has done is put together what they're calling 3 process stages of resilience. And it's using terms that I maybe haven't used before in my practice, but I thought they were reasonable and easy to understand. The first one is just anticipation. And the second one is really, how do we cope and understand, how are we going to get through this? And then how do you need to adapt? And so we know that diversity can lead to the development and improvement of specific capabilities that underlie these 3 process stages. So we're going to look now and dive a little bit deeper into those process stages. So if we're trying to, have a more resilient organization and be a more diverse workplace, we need to look at our resilience capabilities. And under anticipation, we're going to be looking at observation, identification, and preparation. Under coping, we're going to be looking at sense making and problem solving. And under adaptation, we're going to be looking at reflection and learning. But in order for those capabilities to take place, we have to have some resilience enhancing, what I'm calling supportive conditions. This idea of transparency and having a culture where people trust each other, looking at your teams themselves or those units, and looking at your leadership. So let's spend a minute and look at anticipation. So specifically, your anticipation capabilities are comprised of your ability to observe and identify. And so it's really looking at how do you observe your environment and how do you adapt to it. And really, again, a qualifier, resilient organizations can't prevent things from happening, but being able to anticipate helps them to minimize some of those negative consequences or impacts. And this is where we often talk about like things like horizon scanning, planning for the future, that kind of thing, and just paying attention to your environment because diversity has a real positive um, effect on the anticipation stage. I'm sorry. Because you're observing your business environment and you're identifying any relevant information that you need, and you're preparing for those future developments. And I mentioned at the front end that we're going to be talking a lot about experientially diverse groups. I was having a conversation the other day with a group of volunteers that I volunteer with in another organization. And one of I'll just say younger, she's 35, so I didn't actually think that that's that young. But we were talking about adding board members and what criteria. And she actually made the comment that she thought one of the people that wanted to join the team was maybe too old. And so I asked, like, how old is this person? And she said, well, I somewhere, around 60. And I just felt like I was appalled that she would think that somebody was 60 or older wouldn't have the capability to volunteer. And then I shared with her that I thought everyone else on the call was actually between 57 and 65, so that maybe she should know her audience. But it was like she obviously, and I do know her, so I know that she works in a very homogeneous group. She works with people that are very similar to her, and I don't think she has the actual experience to understand the contributions that that have just been around longer and have more experience in life can contribute. Not even talking about, I'm not even addressing her issue of people having the time to do it, but she just had a very narrow focus. And so this can really happen unless you have experientially diverse groups, because they're going to be able to perceive variations in their environment. They're going to be able to say, this happened before, or we've seen this happen before, and this is what happened from it. Just to be able to identify some things they might need to adjust. It also enhances their capability to really to sense and register and regulate that complexity to see what it is. We also need different cognitive diversity, and this is really helpful because when you have people on your team or in your unit that know different things, so this is why you have to talk about having a steering committee being of senior enough management where they have the experience and understanding and knowledge that represents the entire organization. So this, like I said, we're going to be talking about integration a lot with diversity as we're going through, but this idea that um, we have to have people representative of the organization in order to bring in that cognitive diversity when we're trying to interpret, signals and help us to lead to more accurate predictive and collective predictions themselves. Because the team's knowledge base is going to have significant influence on its ability to identify external knowledge and really understanding that locus of that knowledge search. And so just the main thing to take away here is that knowledge base, which is part of that cognitive diversity, the broader it is, the greater amount of information that is able to be absorbed. And there's been a lot of research done on top management teams that have shown that those that are more diverse are better able to do environmental scanning or horizon scanning, and they have a much clearer perception of complex environments. So the one I thought that most of you would enjoy is the anticipation side and being prepared. So of course, preparation diversity helps us to prepare for unexpected events. And this is especially true when you have a complex incident like the pandemic, which is impacting everybody in the organization, and therefore everybody needs to be prepared. And so having those different parts of your organization undertaking preparedness is very helpful. And of course, we know that we can enhance resilience through preparation. We know that That's why we run exercises for whatever way we manage risk. That's why, that's why leaders have strategic planning meetings. This is why we do these things, is you're trying to be better prepared. We are, oftentimes we're not preparing for a specific event, but maybe you are if you're in a hurricane zone or some kind of weather related type of thing. But or if you work for a bank, and I don't know if people even rob banks anymore of any perspective, it's mostly done online stealing. But this idea that we need to develop the general capabilities, knowledge, and functions to manage any kind of unexpected events. And to do that, you need to be prepared to do that. Having a diverse work unit isn't going to reduce the number of events, but it does give us a greater, understanding and variety of ideas. And therefore, maybe that's less of a surprise, and you're better prepared for any kind of impact from that. In addition, we know that, again, all of this is research. I'm not quoting the individual research. I'd like you just to read the article so that you can see who they've referenced. But diverse organizations are really better equipped to adapt as well. And this means that diversity is going to help you to be more adaptive and managing during times of uncertainty and managing change. Again, our different behaviors are overlapping and they support each other. And so if you're better prepared, you're better able to adapt. So we plan for this thing, we got this thing, but we can utilize, A, B, and C from this because this will match up. And these are the gaps that we need to fill. Again, it doesn't mean you're going to anticipate every threat, and you can't really reduce the number, but you should be able to better observe any changes that you're seeing both internally and externally, and help you to identify any risks. And maybe, part of what we talk about in crisis management is issue identification. What's happening out there in our internal and external environments that could potentially cause us to have a problem, and looking at those before they even develop into something else. But to do this, you have to have a proactive alignment, which means, again, kind of that integration is part of your preparation piece. So making sure you're including people across the organization and not doing this in a siloed manner. They also found in innovation research that diversity is really important for creativity and new product development. And so when you have more diversity on your innovation team, you're able to anticipate the needs and desires of your buyers, and you're able to adapt proactively, really, and then reacting to changes before they happen. So trying to get something to the market that's forefront versus once everybody else is there. This idea of anticipatory innovation also helps your organizations to keep pace in that fast changing environment, and even be maybe one step ahead of upcoming changes. You want to be leading the change versus following the change. And this idea that when you have diversity with your innovation, that you're going to result in better products and processes, not just in managing risk. So let's move to diversity and coping capabilities. So coping generally refers to the development and implementation of solutions to a specific problem. So how are we coping in order to make sense of this, in order to solve our problem? And so when you're looking at critical situations, it's really a combination of sense making and acting. So you must understand what the crisis is before you can make any action. And so, like I mentioned, and we're probably going to mention several times, if the main takeaway you get from this is that we need to be diverse so that we can have people that look at things differently when they size up a problem, is really, really important, because they can see things that us individually might not see. And it's really helpful for resilient coping by really constructing the greater variety of interpretations to those diverse situations. It's also really important for resilience. And so the new standard that we're working on, that'll probably be published in a year or so, on organizational resilience policy and strategy, it's a big focus on organizational context. So understanding who you are and how your organization, what's your relationship with the rest of the world. And so in order to really understand your organizational context, you need to have a more diverse workforce to help you, again, with that decision making and deciding what kinds of actions to take, which really, again, leads us to this idea of problem solving, and that we need to have people from different backgrounds, from different functions of the organization, in order to provide that range of knowledge, skills, and behaviors that will help us with problem solving. And this, we're back to this experiential diversity, supports the coping as well, where if you have a broad set of experiences of their members, they can really get a better grasp of the situation and be able to cope with the details better than if people that don't have those. Especially if you're trying to get a novel solution, you've got to come up with something new in order to have an impact or in order to solve that problem. And this diversity of both the skills, the personalities, and the perspectives helps to enhance both, like we said before, both creativity and innovation, which should also help you with your decision making and problem solving. And then when we're looking at the crisis management team itself, and like I mentioned earlier, we often talk about having um, a team of people that represents everybody to help with the leadership of that. And usually in a crisis management team, that'll be representative there. But we need to have different members of that team that have different ideas as well as different tools in their toolbox, really to handle, specific crises, and to take advantage of the process of coping itself, because we know that broader knowledge base is really valuable and helps us to really include different information and to reconcile diverse perspectives, meaning that we have to, when we're doing this problem solving, if we have to look and discuss those different perspectives, it should help us to achieve and be more creative and innovative in our solutions. And there's lots and lots of studies out there that have confirmed the positive impact of diversity on problem solving. And this is probably one of the biggest reasons, besides the social reasons, why we should be really focusing on being more diverse. The group level exchange, how we process information, and how we integrate diverse information and perspectives becomes really important. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but sometimes diversity can be dysfunctional. It can actually slow down the problem solving process. And we're going to talk about the importance of leadership and making sure that that doesn't happen. But we need to make sure that if we have conflicts and difficulties, we have trouble reconciling those different perspectives, this can actually prevent the team from coping effectively with the problem. And so we need to have supportive conditions such as leadership culture and team composition that can help mitigate that. And like I said, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So moving to our third capability, which is that adaptation capability. Diversity helps the organization to be able to better reflect on and learn from those critical events and those prior experiences. And of course, we know that organizations that learn from prior experiences are better prepared for future ones. And that also helps them to broaden their knowledge base, just having experienced that. And so to be successful in the adaptation capabilities, you need to have both cognition and behavior. So the organization must be able to reflect on the current situation and then incorporate that gained insight into that existing knowledge base, and then take some sort of action as part of that to produce the change. So remember that adaptation goes beyond the restoration of organizational functionality. In other words, that whole idea of returning to normal. Well, we have to create a new normal. I think there's no one that hasn't seen the importance of creating a new normal. We can't just go back to the way it was. It does not have it. We can't look backwards. We have to understand what happened and reflect, but we need to take that information to move forward. And so sometimes we really need to make sure that we adapt and adjust and manage change to make sure that you've got that adaptation capability and that it's directed towards facilitating change and really long-term learning. So reflection, being aware and reflective, was actually the topic of last month's webinar. So if you want to learn more about reflection, feel free to take a look at that one. But it's really, reflecting is that interaction process that's about asking questions, seeking feedback, looking at, what have we done, what are our results, and then discuss errors, or unexpected outcomes of your actions. Well, we did this because we expected this to happen, and this is what happened. And so you need to understand what the causes are for that. And so one of the things that they found is a real positive relationship between workplace diversity and the ability of a team to reflect on past experiences. And having those divergent points of view also stimulate better reflection. because those diverse experiences help organizations to focus their attention on those potential causes and perform a more detailed analysis, and maybe even force that situational analysis to produce a more constructive conflict in your groups themselves. So, looking at this idea that if you're more diverse, you're going to have better review or better reflection about what happened, and you're going to be open and reflecting on more potential causes because you're going to have a diverse team's going to be more differentiated and it's going to be more comprehension. Your reflection itself is going to be better because you're going to have people that have already experienced crises, and there's already some development of lessons learned from those and learning from those experiences in general. So like I mentioned early on, just having been through something like just living, being alive for however many years that is, um, you've that experience itself and experiencing problems that you've gotten through before helps to inform you and learn from that for the future. And that's why reflection and learning are so closely tied to each other because diverse teams really benefit on the interpretation process after a crisis due to that broader knowledge base, which really aids in learning as much as possible from that crisis. So that expertise or and experience diversity, just having the knowledge as well as the experience contributes to learning behaviors because it really allows for combining different perspectives and qualified information. And this is why, I think a lot of people in learning, when you talk about what you've learned from others, is as important sometimes as what you've learned on your own. And so, of course, we want to make sure that the conflict that you have in that reflection and learning is going to help protect your teams from the groupthink that we talked about with an international forum. So, and it happens all the time. So we just need to think about that all the time to make sure that we have enough diversity on our team to make sure that we're covering all the bases. And so having those various perspectives and experiences also add value to the learning process of the organization, as well as further development, and just improvement of the organization itself. So having different types of people means you're going to perceive crises in different ways. And when you collect and compile all these perspectives, the most realistic and honest picture of that last crisis situation is really generated. And this really helps and forces organizations to avoid simple interpretations because now we're going to talk about negative conflict, but we have constructive conflict and we have deeper discussions about actions to take. So your diverse knowledge bases may really reduce a tendency to focus on the surface and promote organizational function logic instead of having individual blame or explaining failures themselves. And so when you can make sure that diversity helps you broaden your knowledge bases, you're going to help with not just the next crisis situation, but with any situation of managing change. And so diversity, like I said, can help you contribute to better reflection of learning, eh, better reflection of those experiences, and then more effective learning from those as well. So let's look next at those supportive conditions. So before we kind of get into that, I want to talk about sometimes what the negative um, side of diversity means, because having a diverse team or group of people means it's more complex. And at some point, if you're, depending on what level of diversity you have, it could create different problems for your organization. Number one, it's going to take some time because people who are different from each other take longer to get to know each other, take longer to trust each other. You may have some need to do conflict management to try to neutralize um, some of the negative effects. And so we need to make sure that the company, the organization, is completely supportive um, of diversity, and for all the reasons we've just talked about, and for all the reasons that we haven't talked about that are, been well documented for years. That it's understood that you're changing how you're doing things, or you have different people moving in and out. That's potentially cause a conflict. So sometimes diversity might increase creativity but might lead to dissatisfaction and a lack of identification of the team. And that's why I like that Harvard Business Review picture so much of, the three pink cats or whatever they were. They all have the same ideas. Everybody's happy. This is great. We're getting along. I love working here. And now you're putting a team where there's nobody that thinks like you. And what is going on? I don't want to be part of this. And so sometimes that is a process where um, every individual person in the organization needs to embrace diversity and understand that everybody is bringing their viewpoints to that. And so, in order to really kind of avoid some of those negative effects, and we're going to talk some more about that under leadership and culture, but it needs to be a purposefully designed and managed process. You can't just say, okay, we're going to be diverse, we hire diverse people, and there we go. It is something that you're going to have to manage, and there should be a planned commitment to that. So the three supportive conditions that we mentioned earlier is, having a culture of transparency, so that resilience enhancing diversity culture, having resilience enhancing team conditions. So we're going to be talking about not just team composition, but team collaboration as well. And your resilience enhancing leadership. So when you're looking at leadership qualities and types of leadership, also has an impact. So let's look next at the resilience enhancing diversity culture. A culture of diversity needs to be characterized by the appreciation, and I really liked that word, appreciation, of variety, and the openness towards differences is really likely to accelerate positive outcomes in those diverse work units. And that aspect of valuing diversity is really should be based on an employee's perceptions of the extent to which they feel valued. So you need to ask the question about, how valued do you feel, and the degree of which diversity is viewed as a competitive advantage for the organization. And this really requires a climate that emphasizes diversity as a central, enduring, and distinctive organizational attribute. It has to be. And it needs to be associated with that openness, not only towards others, but also towards error and change, so that this allows the organization to develop the competencies required to really deal effectively with challenges and support continuous improvement. So, like we say, a capability for an organization for resilience is continuous improvement. Well, what do you have to do to have continuous improvement? You need to have a resilience enhancing culture that supports diversity and it values diversity. We mentioned as well that we also need to be really open and transparent, and that the organization's people need to trust that communication, and both within those work units as well as between work units. And this is part of that knowledge sharing piece as well. And so for management and the leadership team, this means it's not enough to value diversity and write your policy. You also need to prevent its negative effects. And so employees need to be both informed about those attitudes and convince them to adopt and include those attitudes in practice. And I think I've shared in past webinars how um, a person that I knew, their company got purchased, and the purchasing company was very clear on their transparency in the workplace and what they would tolerate and what they wouldn't tolerate. And it was kind of under this umbrella of diversity. And one gentleman who'd been there like 40 years was let go on like day 10 because he just figured he could continue behaving the way he'd behaved for years, and that isn't the case. And he got away with it with the other company, but this new company followed up and said, we're telling you what our values are, and we are going to support these values with our behavior and our actions. And so this idea of sharing situational awareness as well as part of that open and transparent communication really helps people to interpret and assess those critical situations as well. One of the things that I think gets lost is we put together a team to do a project and we don't actually give them time to get to know each other. So this is especially important when you put together a new team and it's diverse and they might not work together day to day. And this really happens like on your crisis management team or your business continuity response team or your incident response team, whatever it is. where you're getting people from across the organization to work together. And this is why we have exercises, is because people need time working together, because this isn't a normal thing. They don't normally work together, and therefore we're going to have to have them practice working together in order to interact and collaborate. So, and just to help them get to know each other. You can't trust each other if you don't know each other. And so we need to have sufficient time for effective teamwork. And having that time really allows the members of those diverse units to develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to be able to share their divergent perspectives and share and get a developed sense of who knows what. So who's on our team? What are they contributing? How can we leverage that? Because if team members don't know each other, it's not possible for them to respond effectively to unexpected events. Um, and new teams might not have developed even a role system. So one of the things you see here in team composition is everybody needs to know what their role is. And this idea of relational reserves I thought was pretty interesting. That's a whole topic in itself. But looking at letting something go because you know that person normally does la da da da, but sometimes you don't have those relational reserves if you don't know the person. So what do you need to have in place to cope effectively with the unexpected? And this is where we're talking about how to deal with um, really the composition of teams. And when you're looking at how to build diversity on those teams, making sure that they are effective. Because you need to create diverse teams, and that needs to be done purposefully and in a way that allows for effective performance. So again, you need to know your people. You can't just be grabbing people off the org chart. You need to know who they are and what they do. And so back to that experiential diversity, that mix of generalists and experts really helps teams to identify critical developments and then act on that, because then they can recombine that existing knowledge again to those novel solutions. When you have really strong deep level differences regarding like basic values, what does the organization value? And therefore you would hope that the purpose of the organization and the individual purpose of its people would be in alignment. We actually talked about that, I think, in 2021. But if your values and attitudes and beliefs are very diverse, sometimes it really can have a negative impact on the team's effectiveness, especially during a crisis, because you're focusing on your differences rather than your similarities. And that can reduce that social integration. So again, like I mentioned, we're talking about integration. We need to be able to integrate socially as well. And if we don't do that, it's going to negatively impact your team performance. And so on the front end, we do need organizations to be aware of these connections and then use that knowledge to compose those diverse units with the view to resilience promotion. So if there are people that just don't get along, you probably don't want them working side by side on the same team until they can resolve something. And this idea of coordination becomes really important. Coordination is an actual interpersonal resource. I want you to think about it as a resource, collaboration and coordination. In order to be healthy and resilient and manage your teams, you need to coordinate. And so it becomes a resource for that team and contributes to the team's resilience itself. It also promotes that social integration and well-being in diverse teams and helps those members to integrate and develop that team identity. And I always use the word kind of coordination and collaboration side by side with each other. And this could be more of the time spent in your interactions really allows, remember we just talked about teams need time. So they need to have time to exchange personal and task related information, which supports performance as well. And understanding how the last 3 years and how we've changed our collaboration and how we've changed how we work in teams to be more remote. What has that done to our resilience and enhancing condition of team and unit coordination and collaboration? I, I can't help but think it has had an impact, and we need to figure out how to do that more effectively. Because when we have these social integrations characterized by those shared goals, that shared knowledge and mutual respect, it's going to lead to higher levels of coordination, which is going to give you those positive performance effects as well. So this all has to be led by leadership. Culture and change and all of that has to be supported by leadership. And so your leaders themselves need to be experienced in working with different types of people in different situations. And this is really, I mean, you can just, this is all just talking to it if you don't have leaders that are diverse. And so they need to have a broad knowledge base. And this means while we talk about having leaders at all levels and leaders at all ages, you do need to have leaders who have had experiences. And so it's very, very important that they have that broad base and that they're responsible for fostering that the positive sides of diversities to help prevent that negative diversity. Because leading in a diverse environment is like playing several musical instruments. It calls for different attitudes, skills, and knowledge. Everybody has a different role to play, and you come in at different times. And sometimes you're leading, and sometimes, you're in the background. And so leaders must really be open to different personalities and backgrounds in order to create that fruitful team atmosphere. And this, not just top leaders of your organization, but leaders of your team. And so you need to have a good team atmosphere or a good team culture, and that they can, because if you do that, you're going to be able to handle more discussions and manage those conflicts easier. And so you need to, as an organization, and you need to be looking at um, different leadership traits and abilities and experiences, which also means you need to have different leadership styles. And so one of the things that we found through lots of different research is that leadership styles that are characterized by healing relationships, increasing trust, and solving conflicts are really best suited to access the resilience enhancing potential for diverse work units. So you need to foster that type of leadership style. And they've kind of identified the transformational leader in particular is as, you know, that leadership style that works the best at creating those positive levels of resilience and diversity. And the main thing here is also that leaders need to adapt their leadership style to accommodate the different people and situations. And that's why there are these different leadership styles, and sometimes you need to move from one to the other. So to kind of bring to conclusion, I do have a few more to go, so I appreciate your patience as we get close to the top of the hour. We need to be integrated as well as diverse. And so when you're looking at that from top to bottom and left to right in your organization, what are some outcomes? Well, the organization should integrate and align its systems to reduce silos and bring together the decision makers, the sectors, the departments, the budgets, activities, and agendas. Leaders also need to work across the organization to achieve gains in efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, a very simple example would be to have an integrated audit, for what things you can integrate, what systems are working together, do an integrated audit, save yourself time and money. Because integration and alignment between your systems promotes consistency in decision making and really ensures that all your investments are mutually supportive to that common outcome or to your purpose of your organization. And so you need to make sure that integration is evident within and between your systems and across the different scales of their operation. And this exchange of information between system, really, that's part of the knowledge and sharing of information, enables them to function more collectively and respond more rapidly through shorter feedback loops. So you're not waiting to find out something, people are engaged right away. So you're trying to increase the coordination integration amongst your functions, departments, and organizations because you want to improve your ability to work more effectively and reduce that siloed or stove type behavior. And so you need to have that cross-organization collaboration and alignment, because you often, when we talk about workflow, if you're dependent on another team to provide what you need before you can do your job, you need to be very collaborative and aligned to make sure that happens. And so when you identify challenges and your organization is struggling, you're probably going to hear things like, we've got silos, we've got stovepipes or swim lanes or whatever it is. But you need to bring together those different groups to understand and where possible resolve those challenges. So this organization called Denizen Consulting provides some information about what it is that we should be doing. So the first thing is, we need to recognize the importance of integration. We need to achieve common goals and support the achievement of organizational objectives, which can't be done in isolation. So we understand that each part of the organization contributes to that. And this really requires the development of those effective working relationships. So we talk about working in teams and having relationships within the teams. Now we're talking about working across teams and how one group's work affects others. And so you should bring people together from the areas of an organization where that coordination and integration is important, and making sure that your stakeholders, the ones that you need, are there and that they can collaborate. Because the stakeholders need to be provided an opportunity to openly discuss what's working and what barriers might exist when the work requires collaboration between those stakeholders. And so having this type of facilitated discussion kind of looks and help people to understand, the gives and the gets that you get from each other and what can be done to improve that working relationship. So Denizen Consulting recommends really 3 steps. You need to identify the relationships in the engagement process. So who are the groups that you interact with, and what are the relationships? How can we benefit? Preparing your workshop. So what are going to be our objectives for that, and what do we need to do to prepare for it? And then running that facilitated give and get workshop so that each team shares what it is that they need, what they believe that they, think what they get, and what it is that they're giving and get from each other. And then the facilitator should explore, where is there areas of disagreement, and help really align the participants' expectations of each other to make that really clear. And so when you have these sessions, you really need a comprehensive understanding of the scope of those working relationships and what are those interdependencies, what the working partners do and how they want to do it, and then do an assessment of the quality of the current interactions. What kinds of issues are identified, and how can we address those? And then really put some kind of a working agreement together, maybe in the form of a charter that says, what's our key relationship mission and objectives? How are we going to work together on process side? How are we going to strive for, our tasks, our performance objectives? How are we going to manage issues that come before us, and how can we escalate those if we need to? And then what kind of monitoring process are we going to put in place? So just to summarize, diversity and integration are enabling behaviors for increasing an organization's resilience. Workplace diversity needs to be intentional, led by top management, evident in the organization's culture, and embraced by everyone. And the systems that you have in your organization need to be integrated to improve that collaboration and performance across the organization, thus reducing risk. There's really only 3 references for this. We'll share those with you. To let you know, we have finished up the rest of our year. So in August, we're going to be talking about organizational resilience as a strategic initiative. In September, we're going to get a sneak peek at ICOR's Organizational Resilience Capability Assessment and learn how to measure your organization's resilience. In October, we're going to look at understanding the resilience of your community and why it matters. And I think we have some good examples of that. And we will not have one in November, but instead we'll have it in December on how to build your crisis management capability. Just a reminder, we do have curriculum and certification on how to be a leader in organizational resilience. We also have a measurement tool for how to measure our organization's resilience. And please keep connecting with us on our social media. Join our LinkedIn and our Facebook. Check out our blogs and follow ICOR on YouTube. Thank you very much for attending today. I appreciate the fact that you stuck around for an extra 3 minutes. And like I said, the recording will be available probably by Friday. And the one gentleman that wasn't able to see the slides, you should be able to see them in the recording. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you next month.